G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome to the final build guide for the Rain of Arrows Ranger that I used to get into the top 40 in the One Week Nemesis Race. Preparing for the race, I wanted to go with something tried and true that would be both tanky enough to keep me alive, whilst also being able to contribute enough DPS to be a valuable asset to any party that I joined. My original plan was to take Gangsta Boo's classic Rain of Arrows Ranger and to slightly modify it for myself. However, due to the passive tree changes, there was nothing really for me to refer to in terms of his build. So in the end, I took what I knew of the various classic Rain of Arrows builds and planned out my own take whilst trying to leverage all of the awesome new changes to the Ranger side of the tree. The build performed better than expected on all counts. Leveling was a pleasure because I was able to get all of the major keystones I needed exactly when I needed them, and I had a ton of life and a decent amount of damage passives throughout the early levels. At endgame, everything clicked together and I ended up being incredibly tanky whilst also adding a lot of extra damage to my party. Surprisingly, I was also very resistant to Reflect, with me being able to take on double and even triple Reflect packs without any real problems. All of this saw me be able to get into a really good group in the 1 week race and work with them to earn me my very first demigods. So let's start pulling apart this build to find out how it ticks. The Rain of Arrows Ranger's primary attack skill is unsurprisingly Rain of Arrows. I use this as both my single target and AoE skill as it performs very well at both, though this is only the case once you start running concentrated effect. Before that, Frenzy took on the role of single target DPS. Linked to Rain of Arrows are Blood Magic, Life Leech, Added Fire, Faster Attacks, and Concentrated Effect. It's up to you whether you use Added Fire or Concentrated Effect on your 5 link before you get a 6 link. With one you get more AoE, and with the other you get more DPS. However, once you get a 6 link, your DPS goes through the roof while running both. Our secondary attack is Frenzy. This skill is primarily used for generating frenzy charges to increase our attack speed with Rain of Arrows, though I also use it for Magic Find Culling. I currently have linked with Frenzy Blood Magic, Culling Strike, and increased item rarity. If I ever manage to 5 or 6 link my bow, I'll probably add faster attacks and Added Fire for more damage and faster frenzy charge generation. When it comes to utility skills, you have quite a bit of flexibility with this build, but I'll go through the ones that I like to run and why. Just as a heads up, it's a good idea to link all of these skills that you can with Blood Magic support gems, because we'll be reserving almost all of our mana with auras. First up is the Decoy Brotom. Always a solid addition to any build I find. I use it for distracting dangerous mobs and for keeping volatile Nemesis rares away from me when they explode. You can also throw them in doorways as meat shields while you fire through with Rain of Arrows. As a little side note, Rain of Arrows is incredibly effective at firing through doorways, whereas I've found other bow skills like Lightning Arrow with LMP aren't quite so effective because you can't get all the projectiles through the doorway very easily. Also, if you have a spare support gem, you can link the Decoy Brotom to faster casting to make it quicker to place and more effective at taunting. Next up is the Devouring Totem. This is more of a Nemesis League specific utility skill, as I use it to eat corpses around Soul Conduit rares while in a party. That said, it can also be used to deal with Necromancers. It's just a skill I've had a lot of fun sort of adding into any build that I run now, if I have the space. In terms of curses, I use Projectile Weakness to amplify damage and Temporal Chains to slow down bosses and dangerous rares. Again, faster casting is helpful on these skills as well. I also run a cast when damage taken setup with Enfeeble and Enduring Cry. As soon as I get the right socket colors, I'll also add in Molten Shell for a small armor boost. The cast on damage taken gem I level up to level 4, which gives a level 37 level requirement, and I just obviously line up all the rest of the skills with that. You've probably noticed that in this build there's a bit of curse overlap, and I'll tell you how I make this work. Generally, I'll cast Projectile Weakness on large packs that I know I'm going to kill before they can even hit me, and I'll cast Temporal Chains on scary mobs before they can hit me. When I do get hit, Enfeeble will sort of auto set off from cast when damage taken, and once that does set off, I'll let that take priority so I can continue to reduce the damage that I take just through Enfeeble, and I'll focus on keep attacking and leeching life, and this seems to work out pretty well in practice. When I'm in a party, I just remove all of the curses. I remove Enfeeble from the auto curse and let my perma-curse party member, who there's usually at least one, cast all the curses, and I just won't use the other curses at all. In terms of auras, I link both Grace and Hatred to a reduced mana support gem and use them to reserve almost 100% of my mana. I think it's about level 9 on the reduced mana support gem that you can actually start doing this, so it's a good idea to grab a reduced mana early on and try and level it up as soon as you can. With Iron Reflexes, Grace provides a huge armor boost, and since we are physical damage based, Hatred also gives us a ton of extra damage. As a little side note, the armor from Grace also helps the fact that we're also a physical damage dealing character by helping us reduce the damage taken from Reflect. Overall, it's a fairly simple setup. Some players have commented on my other videos that it lacks a bit of skill diversity because you're mostly just firing Rain of Arrows, but from its simplicity, it gains a ton of efficiency, and in practice it's been really fun to play. So now let's go take a look at how we take advantage of this skill setup in the passive tree. So there's two things I really like about this passive tree before we get into explaining it specifically. The first one is that while leveling, it has a really nice HP progression. So as we start off, we come down through the evasion and life nodes, getting us a fair amount of life. We're then able to grab this really nice life wheel here for 8, 8, and 12. We go past thick skin for a huge increase in life there. Then only after a few more levels, we head up through the Scion life wheel, giving us a ton more life and even some extra base life up there. Now from there, we're able to sort of in the end game get the Templar, we're able to get the Marauder life, and we're able to get some extra life and life leech over this side of the tree. So there's pretty much never really a time in this build where you're going a long stretch without life, and this is always something that is pretty easy to neglect when you're planning out a build. When you're planning out a build, the end build could have the exact amount of life you really want. It could have like 260% life, which will feel really good at endgame, but there might be a big stretch there for like 40 levels, 50 levels, where you're not really getting any life nodes, and that makes it very hard to level on hardcore. And since this was a 1 week race sort of build, I wanted this to be smooth the entire time. So thankfully, my idea actually worked out for the overall shape of the tree, that it worked out that it would also level really well. And while leveling, I felt super tanky. I had so much more life than many other people I played with while sort of progressing through normal and cruel. And that was just really nice sort of side effect of the initial plan. The second thing I really like is that once we get each of the keystones, so we've got Point Blank, we've got Iron Reflexes, and I'll explain all these in a second, we've got Iron Grip, Unwavering Stance, and Resolute Technique over here. Once we get each of those, every single level from that point onwards is pretty much spent getting actual nodes. Now there's nothing I hate more than when you get to like level 70, level 80, when your leveling starts to slow down a lot, and you're doing this, you're getting strength nodes. How bad does that feel when you're say you get to level 70 and you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nodes before you get anything you want, like with the static blows sort of build up here. That's why I usually try whenever I'm playing a build to rush all of the highway nodes as early as I can, so that when leveling progression starts to slow down, I'm actually picking up really interesting nodes each time. And that just makes the build more rewarding to play at endgame, and sort of makes you a bit more eager to push in through those high level maps and to level it into the late 80s and even into the early 90s. So, with that out of the way, those are the things I really like about this build, but other than that, it feels pretty efficient, and we'll go through sort of like how you level this, the order you take things in, and why we're taking each thing. So, the first thing is we're going to come down through this way. We grab Finesse as well as all the evasion and life nodes there that work really well. Since we're taking Iron Reflexes as well, we convert all of our evasion into armor later on, and these evasion nodes help out a little bit if we're using any evasion gear, and also from Grace, so that helps out a little bit. Finesse is a really nice node, so we get attack speed from there, and it gives us accuracy up until the point where we get Resolute Technique, where it becomes, the accuracy becomes a non-issue. But attack speed, and we're going through there anyway, works out really nicely. As I said, I've pointed out all these main life nodes here, and all of this stuff. Now, at sort of any point where you feel like you want more DPS, you can come through these nodes here. We get really nice 8% attack speed. Even if we weren't taking the rest of this, we would take that node. But we go through projectile damage. Ballistic Mastery is really nice with Rain of Arrows. The 20% increased projectile speed means that the Rain of Arrows actual effect lands faster, which kind of like, you don't need it to be instantaneous. I haven't found any need for the projectile speed support gem, for example, but this extra projectile speed just makes it a bit easier to judge. Basically, that delay means that sometimes when you're fighting a Corrupting Blood mod, for example, you might stop firing, use your Dispels, Bleed, Flask, and then you might still get 2 more stacks after you stop firing with Ballistic Mastery. So without Ballistic Mastery, that's a little bit worse. You might get 3 or 4 stacks of Corrupting Blood, for example, without realizing. And then also obviously has similar issues with Reflect, but it's not a big deal. We also get Aspect of the Eagle, which is a fantastic node as well, and some really nice fizz damage nodes through here. You'll notice the theme that we're pretty much focusing on fizz damage in this build, and that's because we try to get as high a fizz damage bow as possible, any other fizz damage mods as we can, and then we amplify that out through conversion to elements and attack speed as well. So we'll get a bit of attack speed and lots of fizz damage buffs. Now we come down and Point Blank. Point Blank is pretty interesting. It works really well with Rain of Arrows. It gives you more damage when you need it, and less damage when you don't want more damage. So to explain that further, when you're up close to a rare, you're in a party or something like that, you're able to deal more damage and DPS down that rare very quickly. Same thing with bosses, and same thing with sort of simpler mobs that you want to kill more quickly. Now you can deal still a decent amount of damage at range, but it's going to be reduced. But what this really means is when you are firing sort of towards the edge of your screen, and all of a sudden, a Reflect pack a reflect mob sort of comes on screen, and that pack that you were firing at range all of a sudden becomes a massive reflect pack. If you're dealing 100% of your damage, you are much more susceptible to reflect, but since we're firing towards the edge of our screen and dealing less damage because it's outside of our point blank range, we're actually less susceptible to reflect. So this kind of changes the playstyle of the build quite a bit, where you're getting closer to mobs, and this gives you more time to react to the fact that there's a reflect pack up there. So basically, to get more damage before your damage starts amplifying, you actually have to run up to that reflect pack. And well, if you run up to that reflect pack and get yourself killed to reflect after having all of that time to sort of identify that it was a reflect pack, then I don't know what to say. There's not too much a build can help apart from that. But overall, the playstyle of Point Blank really, really works with Rain of Arrows, and I highly, highly recommend it. I underestimated it at first, but when I picked it up, I regretted not picking it up earlier. So back to the passive tree, we also grabbed the heavy jaw cluster because it's a really nice life and physical damage cluster as well. Works out really, really well. The increased stun duration is not to be overlooked as well. Rain of Arrows hits really hard. It's a single hit very hard. It's not like lightning arrows where it chains and there's multiple small hits that deal the high amount of damage eventually. There's single big hits, and the stun that happens with Rain of Arrows can be really, really effective. I'm even able to stun blues and rares in playing by myself or with one or two other people, and in a pack, like in a group of 6 people, I'm still able to stun rares and trash mobs and some blue mobs as well. So works out pretty well. Increased stun duration is always very nice. As I said, we go through iron reflexes. As a little side note, you'll notice we go past quite a few intelligence nodes here, and these are pretty helpful to pick up while you're leveling until you get some extra intelligence on like an amulet or something like that. In terms of sort of ducking down after the Iron Reflex area, we can eventually, I do this in the later game, come through Fury Bolts, which gives us more projectile damage in here, attack speed, and we also get acceleration. I got this at a pretty high level, and getting 12% attack speed at a high level was such a nice buff. Then we get in what's pretty much the only armor increase in this build, and that is the Leather and Steel node here. It's 24% increased armor. When you finally get this is a huge boost to your armor. You might have something like AK base armor, and getting this multiplies it out by quite a bit. The movement penalty reduction also is really nice. It's sort of increasing your clear speed at the later levels. Coming through Sentinel gives us more elemental resistances, and then we're able to go through the Scion Life Wheel, which is fantastic. Also getting the extra physical damage from Path of the Warrior is very nice. Now we can come down through and grab Iron Grip. I did this before sort of progressing up. So in terms of leveling progression, I basically went down through here, grabbed each of the life nodes, sort of rushed through, got Iron Reflexes on the way through, rushed through the Scion Life Wheel, and then after getting the Scion Life Wheel, I came down and grabbed Iron Grip and Unwavering Stance, Blood Drinker for Leech, and these two 12% life nodes there. We can also grab Berserking around that point as well for a pretty nice, I think it's about 6 or 7% attack speed each. I can't remember what the math on that is, but it's still very efficient if you're already going past Berserkering. So from that point, we go up and grab Resolute Technique. By this point, by this level, your accuracy will probably be falling below 90%. So when that does happen, that's a good time to grab Resolute Technique. If you're still above 90%, like you have some accuracy in your gear, you can simply just leave it for a while, save 3 passive points, spend them elsewhere. Now, originally on this build, I planned to go on the outside here, and this is a very common sort of path to go through Athleticism and then through Catalyze. However, I found Catalyze nodes, although we use Added Fire and although we use Hatred, it doesn't work out to be that much of a boost, at least compared to where we could spend those points on more physical damage. So instead, I dropped these points and I dropped these life nodes here, and we ended up going the more point-efficient route, since we're already going this way, through these nodes here and up through this life. Now, we grab Amplify because this increases the radius of Rain of Arrows, and I'm even considering eventually getting these 4% nodes if I have some extra points. But the increased damage is also really nice for that, as well as this life and regen. This is actually the first regen node you'll get in the build, and before that point, you just kind of have to use Flask between packs. It's the only little tiny downside of leveling as this character I found was a little bit awkward not having any regen whatsoever. But getting that node helps that out. And on a similar note, the points I saved from going up through this way originally, I instead spent on going down into the Marauder section. This gives us more regen here and here. We also get more resistances, making gearing easier on the build. Gearing is fairly easy on this build as it is. And we get the critical strike multiplier reductions, which are really, really nice as well for just sort of leveling out the amount of damage you take. Since we're getting hit a lot, we're an armor-based character, we're trying to mitigate, reducing the amount of damage we take from critical strikes. Very, very nice. And this life here ended up being more point efficient than what I was getting before here. And that pretty much covers it. Basically, once you sort of get your Iron Reflexes, get your Iron Grip, get your Leech here, get Unwavering Stance, and get Resolute Technique, and probably the Templar area there. You basically have the choices of, you know, if you want more life, you want more defense, go down into the Marauder. If you instead feel like you want a bit more damage at that point, you can come through this way. This is like a pure damage area here. If at that point though you feel maybe you want a bit of a balance between offense and defense, and maybe want to go a little bit faster, attack and move a bit faster, you simply go through Fury Bolts, Acceleration, and Leather of Steel. I really like the flexibility of this build. When I was leveling in the 1 week race, I was able to sort of feel like I was able to get whatever I needed at each point, sort of progressing through the end game. So I felt like, yeah, I need a bit more DPS to help my party out a bit more. So I was able to grab all these. Then later I was like, I kind of want a bit more armor and a bit more attack speed and move speed. So I came down through here. You have lots of different options, and it ends up being really flexible, and I'm pretty happy with it overall. Okay, so now let's go through the gearing for this build. Now keep in mind that most of this gear was acquired in the 1 week race, although I guess that doesn't mean too much because of the amount of time and effort we put into gearing and progressing our characters in that short time period. But it still does say something about, you know, the size of the economy in the 1 week race is much smaller than any of the other leagues, so you should have an easier time gearing than I did if you're playing in like Nemesis or Domination. So, let's start off with the bow. It's always nice to start off with the weapon. We're looking for a high phys damage bow, and what this entails is a high percentage increased physical damage modifier, and at endgame we're looking at like 150% increased phys damage is a nice number to aim for, and while leveling you're looking for 80, 90 or 100% sort of increased physical damage on your leveling bows. Now this by itself is nice, but to make it really shine, you absolutely must have this adds physical damage modifier. As you can see, I've got adds 27 to 41 here, and the increased physical damage percentage modifier multiplies this out, and that's what gets you a really high phys damage bow. Without that combination of those two mods, it just doesn't really work as kind of highly as it could. Now on top of that, if you can get attack speed, you're going to be doing really nicely. Now this bow doesn't have attack speed, it's a decent attack speed bow, and it works out okay. 1.35 is what I would say to be the minimum of what makes this build sort of feel really fun to play, but if you can get this bow with an increased attack speed modifier, it's going to feel even better. So the base types of bows to aim for at endgame are like spine bows, ranger bows, imperial bows, and thicket bows are all good options. The thicket bow being on the faster attack speed sort of end of the spectrum there. It feels really good, but as long as you get a high flat phys damage modifier on that, it's going to be really nice. Now the increased projectile speed, don't overvalue this at all. I wouldn't really miss this if this bow didn't have it. Sure, it makes Rain of Arrows land a little bit faster, but in actual effect that doesn't seem to make too much difference. I've played with plenty of bows on this character without the projectile speed, and it really didn't make a difference. Now any other elemental damage mods are only just a small amount of icing. Really don't prioritize those, and when you're calculating the DPS of a new bow upgrade for this build, don't include it in your DPS calculations. Only look at the base physical damage, because that's what gets multiplied out by everything else, like added fire and hatred, and all of our physical damage nodes in the tree. So really focus on those. These are only, like as I said, small amount of icing. The only thing they're going to get multiplied by is any increased weapon elemental damage we get from gear, and that's not often going to be a lot. So taking a look at the quiver next, the optimal quiver basically has life, and then physical damage and attack speed. That's really what you want on your quiver. However, as you can see, I've just got a really nice defensive quiver here with a high life roll and a nice amount of resist. The added fire damage, again, really not a big issue. It's only a slight DPS increase. In fact, I can probably take this off and you'll barely see my DPS drop. You know, like about 100 DPS drop at this point is a really low DPS drop for just losing those two elemental damage mods there. Really not a big deal. So next up, we'll probably take a look at the gloves. Again, physical damage and attack speed are optimal. They're going to increase your DPS by a ton. I've just got a pretty low physical damage mod on here, but other than that, this is just a nice defensive pair of gloves here. We've got nice fire resist, life, and evasion. Try and get on all of your armor pieces of gear as higher evasion or armor evasion rating as possible. You have a fair bit of flexibility in the base type of gear. As you can see, I'm using mostly evasion gear here, and I've got an armor type chest piece. But the easiest one to roll the socket colors that we need for this build are going to be armor/evasion chest pieces, or like basically any types of armor, sorry. So if you can get those, try and go for those, but otherwise, as you see, you can kind of mix and match between those three armor types. Iron Reflexes gives us a lot of flexibility, and that's kind of one of the reasons I chose this build for the 1 week race, because it's so gear flexible as well. In terms of boots, move speed helps a lot with this character in terms of repositioning for Rain of Arrows. Basically, when you're playing a lot of the time, you're going to be trying to get up close for point blank, so that means if there's a mob over there, you're going to want to sort of fire and get close to them and then fire. So having that increased attack speed helps a lot, and it's the same reason we run an Adrenaline Quicksilver as well, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But other than that, we've got the helmet, and that's basically just your defensive slot. There's nothing too much else you need on the helmet. As you can see here, I can't run my Molten Shell because getting 3 red, 1 blue on an evasion type helmet is very, very difficult, and this is one of the reasons I recommend going for armor/evasion types. And if I can find a helmet that's armor evasion that's as good as this one, then I'll be able to wear Molten Shell as well in my cast on damage taken setup, which you can see here. So I'm pretty eager to do that. But otherwise, as I said, the helmet's just a defensive slot. Now, any extra rarity you can pick up is nice. We're going to be, as I said in the earlier skill description, I'm running a Culling Strike setup with item rarity. So as you can see, the 21% on the helmet there is also a nice addition to that. And basically, whenever you roll with a group that doesn't have a magic find collar of some description, you'll be that guy. And Frenzy is nice to do that, sort of culling bosses. And any sort of what we call ghetto rarity, just like whatever rarity you can sort of pull together, is going to help out and just get that in addition to anything else there. The chest piece is where I recommend getting your 5 and 6 link. Don't do it on a bow. You're going to be upgrading your bows all the time. People tend to really try, like if they're a bow character, try and get a 5 link bow. Really just go for the best base bow you can get and get your 5 or 6 link on your chest, especially with Rain of Arrows. Rain of Arrows is our main attack skill. It really doesn't matter if you can't link Frenzy. It's easy to get a 4 link bow, and that's what I'm still running. But the 5 or 6 link on Rain of Arrows is super important, and as you can see, the 6 link here, which I chose to be concentrated effect, adds a huge amount of DPS. Without it, we drop down to 4,100, and with it, up to 7k. So really big deal trying to get that 5 or 6 link chest if you can. And then anything else on top of that 5 or 6 link is just whatever bonus stats you can get. As you can see, I've just got a little bit of life resistances and chaos resist. Try and get whatever chaos resist you can after you've maxed out your other resistances. Pretty basic stuff. Optimal Belt is a rustic sash. Increased physical damage really helps out a lot. I think the strength is the only damage buff on here besides that, but you can see that adds a really big amount of DPS as well, 400 just for that, so pretty nice stuff. Otherwise, just life and resists are the way to go, really. If you can get reduced enemy stun threshold on your belt as well, I do recommend getting that. I would like to get that on my optimal endgame belt. That would be really nice to see. In terms of rings and amulets, these are really your slots to make up whatever you're missing. So I'm sort of in the process now of really trying to work my way out of my race rings here. And these aren't that great. They kind of work nicely. I've got a decent amount of life and resist on that one. And we've got some fizz damage. If you can go for fizz damage and attack speed on your rings, go for that. Otherwise, get whatever other defensive stats you need. And try and get some chaos resist on there. As a life-based character, I really want to increase my chaos resist as close to 0% as possible. I've got minus 35. And that does feel a little bit low, but a little bit more than that, I'll feel pretty golden, I think. And then finally is the amulet. Basically, in terms of rings and amulets, if you can get Life Leech anywhere, try and get it, because it's going to help you out a lot. As you can see, I've got 3% Life Leech on this amulet, and combined with Life Leech from my support gem here, and I'm using a quality Life Leech as well, because the increased leech rate helps a lot with Reflect. In addition to getting that and the 2% from the tree, the 3% on here means that on our Rain of Arrows, we have how much? Let's sort of calculate this out here. 7.3% here is a low level Life Leech even. 3% there brings us up to 10. We've got about 12% Life Leech. It'll probably go up to 11 or 12. It'll probably go up to 13 or 14%, sorry, when we max out that Life Leech gem. And that's a huge amount of Life Leech considering the amount of fizz damage and the amount of damage we do with Rain of Arrows. And that's why, combined with our high armor amount here, we're able to deal with Fizz Reflect and Elemental Reflect as well really well. So if you can, try and get that where you can. Otherwise, just getting fizz damage, attack speed, and any resists and life you can get. Try and get as much life as you can on each piece, on each gear slot. As you can see, I'm trying to get as close to 90 or 100 as I can on all slots. And I've got like 85 there, 69 there on those boots are pretty nice otherwise. Pretty low in my chest piece, just sort of doing what I can to get as much life as possible. And since this build has such a high percentage amount of life, like all of these life nodes all around the tree, any life we get on gear is amplified out, and that's why we can end up with like 5.5k to 6k life sort of once we have nice gear at the end. So that works out pretty nicely there. Now, besides Life Leech, the other quality gem I reckon, I always like to recommend, 1 or 2 quality gems if I can to people that have a little bit of extra currency to spend. I recommend Rain of Arrows. The 10% increased attack speed of Rain of Arrows works out really, really nicely, and it makes the build more fun to play, and it makes it much more effective as well. So that's the one I sort of went for, and then Life Leech is probably the other really important one, so go for those if you can. So now let's take a look at Flask. I'm sort of always playing around with what I feel to be my optimal Flask setup, and I'm very happy with what I've done on this character so far. Now we're running a Granite of Iron Skin, try and get as high a percentage increased armor during Flask effect as you can, and we can see how effective this is when I hit my Granite of Iron Skin. My armor goes up to almost 20k there, 68% in estimated physical damage reduction. And when we're running with a party, we'll also have determination auras often, and we can get insane estimated physical damage reduction, especially when we're also getting Enduring Cry and Molten Shell proccing as well. So really nice there. And if you're having any problems with physical reflect, the Granite's going to help you through that really nicely. The prefix, instead of ample like I've got now, I recommend increased Flask charges gained. Is going to help you have more uptime on that Granite. Now, although we're Iron Reflexes and can use a Jade Flask, I recommend going for the Granite because you're going to have more uptime on it, and it just works out to be a little bit easier to use. I use a Perpetual Quicksilver of Adrenaline, and this is not perfectly rolled, it's kind of only okay, but I will fix this soon. But basically, more uptime from the charge recovery is really nice. Basically, whenever I'm sort of farming in a map and clearing pretty quickly, I'm riding this Flask all the time. I'm basically fighting like this. By the time I kill the next pack, I'm going to have another charge, and I'm just going to sort of chain it together a lot of the time. There's pretty much very few times in a map where I'm not using a Quicksilver whenever I'm moving, so definitely use that. The Adrenaline makes it much easier to reposition with Rain of Arrows, feels really good, and the increased charge recovery again is for that uptime. Now I use just basically a Bleeding Flask here. I'm not really sure about the Saturated. Saturated's really nice with the Sanctified Life Flask. That works out well because it increases the amount recovery, reducing the recovery speed, but since they're already such short duration recoveries, it ends up being really effective. This is a nice heal, and also the removes bleeding is really nice to have on there as an essential for Nemesis, I would say. The other one I use is a Seething of Grounding, and the insta-heal is really nice there. Always do insta-heal flasks like Seethings on your Hallowed Life Flask because they heal a greater amount instantly, so that's nice. And Dispelled Shock, so whenever I'm sort of panicking and getting shock stacked by a Storm Herald, I can basically tap that flask and it's going to remove my shock stacks and insta-heal me as well, so that works out really nicely. The other one I use, and this one is not one everyone will want to go for, but I'm really happy with it, is a Saturated, so this is reduced recovery speed, increased amount recovered, with immunity to curses. Now I like to run immunity to curses on this because look at that duration, 11.9% duration on that. And since I'm Blood Magic, and whenever I'm taking damage I'm also using some life, and our life's going to be down, so this means I'm going to have very long-term curse immunity while I'm fighting. Now keeping in mind I'm not leeching at the moment, and that's going to help me keep my life up as well. But basically it's just like a huge amount of increased regeneration while that's under effect. Hence Hex Font mobs can't affect us while we've got this, and you know, it's going to just keep those curses away. Really nice stuff. I'm pretty happy with that overall. And I think that just about covers it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this in-depth look at my Rain of Arrows Ranger. Although it's a pretty simple build, I've found it incredibly fun to play, perhaps even rivaling my EK Scion. If you're looking for something that's pretty easy to gear, plays well in a group or solo, and is very balanced in terms of tankiness and DPS, then you may just want to give this one a go. If you're curious to check out any of my other builds, make sure you check out the playlist linked in the description. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.